The soft glow from the streetlight slipped through the curtains as I unlocked the door. The quiet hum of the neighborhood felt louder than usual. My shift had ended early, but something pulled me home before the clock gave me permission. I've always trusted my gut. It's a cop thing, and tonight, it churned with a feeling I couldn't explain. Inside, the air felt strange, like the charged silence before a storm. The house wasn't fancy, but Jessica and I had made it ours. Photos of us smiling on vacations, her bright eyes on our wedding day, and little trinkets from over a decade of marriage filled the shelves. But tonight, it all felt fake, like a set for a life I thought I was living. At first, I didn't see her. The living room was empty except for 2 wine glasses on the coffee table, both with lipstick smudges. My stomach sank. 2 glasses. That's when I heard faint voices upstairs, and the ground felt like it shifted beneath me. Every creak of the stairs mocked me as I climbed, each one whispering what I already knew deep down. The bedroom door was slightly open, and through the gap, I saw shadows moving on the wall. Then I heard her laugh, a soft, playful sound I hadn't heard from her in months. "You're such a bad influence," she giggled. Her voice, the one I'd loved for so many years, sounded light and happy. I didn't need to hear his reply. That low, confident tone was enough to confirm what my gut had been screaming. My fists clenched, nails digging into my palms, as my mind tried to catch up with what my eyes had already seen. There she was, my Jessica, tangled in our sheets with some man I didn't know but instantly hated. I didn't storm in or yell like they do in the movies. Instead, I stepped back, bile rising in my throat and tears blurring my vision. My training told me to stay calm, assess the situation, but how could I? This wasn't a case file. This was my life. I left the house before I did something I'd regret. Outside, the cold air hit me like a slap, but it didn't cool the fire raging inside me. I got into my car and gripped the steering wheel so hard it felt like it might break. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? How did I not see it? Who the hell was he? For hours, I drove aimlessly, replaying every argument we'd ever had, every moment she pulled away or seemed distant. Slowly, the pieces started falling into place, painting a picture of betrayal I'd been too blind to see. By the time I pulled back into the driveway, it was late. The house was dark and silent, but I knew I couldn't leave things like this. I needed answers. When I walked in, Jessica was on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. She looked up, surprised, then annoyed. "You're back early," she said casually, as if nothing had happened. I stared at her, trying to find the woman I'd married. All I saw was a stranger. "Who was he?" I asked, my voice colder than I expected. Her eyes widened for a moment, then narrowed. "What are you talking about?" she replied, playing dumb. "Don't," I said, shaking my head. "I heard you. I saw you." There was a flicker of panic before she masked it with defiance. "You're being ridiculous. Maybe you misheard something." I could feel my chest tightening. Misheard? She really thought I was that stupid. "There were 2 glasses downstairs," I said. "Lipstick on both." His voice. "You're laughing." My words came out sharper than I intended. She pressed her lips into a thin line. "So now I can't have a friend over?" "A friend? In our bed?" My voice rose and she stood, the blanket falling to the floor. I waited for her to apologize, to explain, but instead, I saw defiance in her eyes. "Maybe," she said, her tone biting, "if you weren't always working, I wouldn't need someone to talk to." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. "You think this is my fault?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger. "I'm not saying that," she snapped, then muttered under her breath, "but you're not exactly innocent either." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was twisting everything, making me out to be the villain. Before I could respond, she turned and walked upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I stood there in the silence, feeling my entire world crumble. How could the person I loved most just walk away like it was nothing? That night, as I stared at the wine glasses on the table, I knew everything was about to change forever. The next morning, I confronted her again, this time calmer but no less angry. She was at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. The sight of her acting so normal made my blood boil. "Who is he?" I asked, standing over her. She didn't even look up. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play games with me, Jessica," I said, my voice firm. I found his sweater. I smelled his cologne. "I heard you." Her head snapped up, and for a moment, her irritation showed. "You're obsessed," she said. "You've been working these murder cases so long. You think everything's a conspiracy." "Funny," I said, leaning in closer. "You haven't denied it." "Not once." She rolled her eyes. "You want the truth? Fine. I cheated. Happy now?" The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. "How long?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. "Does it matter?" she said, shrugging. "You've been absent for months, Brian." I was lonely. "So this is my fault?" I asked, my anger flaring again. "No," she said sharply. "It's our fault. You buried yourself in your job and left me alone." I stared at her, the woman I thought I knew, and realized there was nothing left to say. Without another word, I turned and left the house, the door slamming behind me. "What kind of secrets?" I asked, leaning in close. Nathaniel hesitated, glancing around like he thought someone might be listening. When he finally spoke, it was barely more than a whisper. "I think she's been setting us both up," he said. "I'm not sure why, but I can't shake the feeling she's playing a much bigger game." My head spun as his words sank in. Lies on top of lies. A whole house of cards, ready to collapse. Suddenly, the way I saw Jessica shifted. She wasn't just a cheater anymore. She was something far more dangerous. And for the first time, I wondered, was I even the real target? Nathaniel's words hung in the air like smoke, choking out any chance of clear thinking. She wasn't just cheating, according to him. She was scheming, manipulating, and maybe planning something far worse. I stared at him, trying to figure out if this was another one of his lies, just another way to mess with me. But his cocky smirk was gone, replaced by a look of real fear. "What the hell are you talking about?" I asked again, this time gritting my teeth. Nathaniel ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting around nervously. "Look, I didn't want to be here. There's nothing in this for me. But after last night, I started connecting the dots. Jessica isn't who you think she is." "Then who is she?" I demanded. My patience was gone. "Stop speaking in riddles." He leaned closer. "She's been manipulating us both. I don't know how deep it goes, but she's hiding something big. Money stuff, maybe. Or worse." The mention of money made my stomach churn. Jessica had always been the one to handle the bills. She said I was too busy working to bother with that mundane stuff. But was that the real reason? Was she funneling money somewhere I didn't know about? "I don't believe you," I snapped, even though doubt had already started creeping in. "Why would she set you up? What's her angle?" Nathaniel let out a sharp breath. "At first, I thought it was just an affair too. But then she started asking for favors, big ones, transfers, signing things in my name. She's persuasive, man." He paused, watching me closely. "Last week, she asked me to help her get into a safe deposit box. Said it was her late dad's. But the way she talked about it didn't make sense." My jaw clenched. Jessica's dad had been dead for years, and he hadn't left anything behind but debt. A safe deposit box? That was news to me. Every word Nathaniel said chipped away at the trust one thought I had with my wife. I'd already thought I'd hit rock bottom, but now it felt like the ground beneath me was giving way, and I was falling even deeper. When I got home, Jessica was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing had changed. Seeing her so calm, so unaffected, made my blood boil. I wanted to confront her right then and there, throw Nathaniel's accusations in her face. But I held back. I needed the truth first. Grabbing a beer from the fridge, I sat across from her, forcing myself to sound casual. "Busy day?" She glanced up, giving me that tight little smile of hers. "Just catching up on emails." "You?" "Same old," I lied. I took a sip of my beer, then asked, "You remember that trip to Florida last year? The one where your dad's old lawyer called?" Her face froze for just a second before she recovered. "Sure. Why?" "He mentioned some safe deposit box, didn't he? Said it was yours now." Her eyes flickered. Panic? Maybe? Annoyance? It was hard to tell. Oh, that. Yeah, but it's nothing important. Just some old papers. Why? I shrugged, keeping my tone light. No reason. Just crossed my mind. She studied me for a moment, then went back to her phone, brushing it off like it was nothing. But the way she dismissed it so quickly only made my suspicions grow stronger. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to know. That night, after she went to bed, I started digging. Her laptop was password protected, of course, but her phone? She'd never changed her passcode. It was still my badge number. A cruel little detail, in hindsight. Once inside, I combed through her texts, emails, and bank apps. That's when I found it. A payment to a storage facility in the next town over. It wasn't cheap either. Definitely not for storing a few old clothes. I kept digging and found more payments linked to names I didn't recognize. This wasn't just an affair. It was something much bigger. I copied the address and drove to the facility. The place was deserted, lit by one flickering light near the entrance. I found her unit easily. It was listed under her maiden name. Another slap in the face. The lock was standard, and with a few tools I'd used on the job, I had it open in minutes. The musty smell hit me as I stepped inside, but my attention went straight to the large safe in the corner. The digital lock looked expensive, but it had a backup keyhole. A rookie mistake. 15 minutes later, I cracked it open, and my blood ran cold. Inside were stacks of cash, neatly bundled and wrapped in rubber bands. Way more money than Jessica should have had access to. But that wasn't all. There were documents, bank statements, legal papers, even a passport with her photo on it. Only, the name wasn't hers. And at the bottom of the safe, I found a handgun. Clean, polished, unregistered. I drove home, my mind racing. The pieces were starting to come together, but they didn't paint a pretty picture. The money, the lies, the gun. Was Jessica planning to run? Or worse, was she planning to take me out? When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something odd. The living room light was on, but the curtains were drawn tight. My pulse quickened as I stepped inside. There she was, sitting on the couch, her expression cold and calculating. "You've been busy," she said, her voice sharp and cutting. She knew. Somehow, she knew. And in that moment, I realized. The woman I married was long gone. The person sitting in front of me? She was a stranger. Minutes later, the house was crawling with officers. Dave came over, his face a mix of concern and disbelief. "Brian, what the hell happened here?" I handed him the gun, my hands shaking now that the adrenaline had worn off. "It's a long story," I said, glancing at Jessica as they cuffed her and let her out. "But it's over. Finally. Or at least, I thought it was." Her words hit me like a physical blow, but I held my ground. Every bit of anger, confusion, and betrayal I'd felt in the past few days surged to the surface. "I didn't ruin anything. You did this, Jessica. You chose this path," I said, my voice steady but with a raw edge to it. "And now you're going to pay for it." Her expression hardened. "You have no idea what you're up against, Brian. You think this is the end? You're just a pawn in a much bigger game." Before I could respond, Harper made a sudden move, reaching for something on the table. His hand brushed over a set of documents, but I wasn't about to give him the chance to grab anything else. "Freeze," I barked, my finger tightening on the trigger, but Harper's face twisted into something sinister. "You're too late," he sneered, his voice low and dangerous. She was always the one in charge. Jessica took a step toward me then, her calm demeanor never wavering. "It's not personal, Brian," she said, her voice like ice. "You were just a distraction. I always had bigger plans." The words stung like a slap in the face. I'd spent years thinking we had something real, something worth fighting for. But standing here now, I realized how wrong I was. The sound of sirens outside grew louder. The cavalry was closing in, but I knew I didn't have much time. Harper, ever the opportunist, glanced nervously at the door. "You don't have much time, Brian," he said, a hint of panic creeping into his voice. "They're coming for all of us." For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of doubt. Was this just the beginning? Was there a network of people behind her? But I shoved it down. I couldn't afford to second-guess myself now. You're done, I said, stepping forward and closing the distance. Hands where I can see them. Jessica smirked. Go ahead, Brian. Arrest me. But know this, you'll never find out everything. There's always more beneath the surface. Her cryptic words hung in the air, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of responding. I wasn't about to let her control the narrative anymore. I had to end this, even if it meant taking down the woman I once loved. When the backup officers finally burst through the door, Jessica and Harper were taken into custody without incident. As they were led out of the warehouse, Jessica's cold gaze met mine one last time, her eyes burning with a mix of defiance and something I couldn't quite place. Dave was among the officers who arrived at the scene. He approached me with a serious expression. You good? He asked, eyeing the chaos around us. I nodded, my body feeling like it was finally beginning to unwind from the tension. Yeah, I'm good. Dave studied me for a moment, then gave a small, grim smile. You've been through hell, Brian. But it's over now. Is it, though? I wondered. Part of me wanted to believe that it was. Part of me wanted to walk away, to leave all of this behind. But I knew better. Jessica's words still echoed in my head. There was always more beneath the surface, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever truly be rid of her and whatever she'd left behind. As I watched the squad car pull away, with Jessica and Harper sitting in the back, I knew one thing for certain. This was far from over. The truth, the whole truth, had only just begun to surface, and I couldn't let it go. Not yet. Not until I understood what she had been hiding all along. As they loaded her into the patrol car, Jessica shot me one last look, a cold, hard stare that promised this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The house felt emptier than ever after they took her away. The echoes of her venomous words, the weight of her betrayal, and the chaos of the last few days clung to every corner. Dave was still surveying the damage, his eyes scanning the wreckage of my life, while I slumped onto the couch, feeling exhausted, numb. You've got one hell of a mess here, Brian, Dave said, his voice a mix of disbelief and concern. I rubbed my face, the adrenaline fading, leaving me hollow. You don't say, I muttered. Dave sighed and sat on the arm of a chair across from me. Look, I've seen my share of messy divorces, but this is something else. A gun, a partner in crime. What the hell was she even planning? I shook my head. I don't know. She had cash, fake IDs, and a storage unit full of secrets. I think she was planning to disappear, but there's more to it. I can feel it. Dave shot me a look. You're not thinking of digging into this, are you? Let the department handle it. You're too close, Brian. Too close. That was an understatement. My whole world had been turned upside down. The woman I thought I knew better than anyone had turned out to be a complete stranger. Still, Dave had a point. I was too raw. I wasn't thinking straight, but something inside me wouldn't let it go. I'll try, I lied, knowing full well I wouldn't. The next day, I went to the station to give my statement. It felt unreal sitting in the interrogation room, the same one I'd used a million times with Dave on the other side of the table. Now, I was the one being questioned. I told him everything, the affair, the safe, the confrontation, the man in the suit. I didn't hold back, even though reliving it felt like ripping open fresh wounds. When I finished, Dave leaned back in his chair, his face grim. This is going to take a while to untangle, Brian. Fake IDs, the cash, it's not just infidelity. She's been into something big, dangerous. Do you think she's tied to a larger operation? I asked, my voice low. It's possible, Dave said, nodding. We'll look into it, but you need to stay out of it. Let us do our job. You're too close. I nodded, but as soon as I left the station, I knew I couldn't just let it go. Jessica wasn't just tangled up in something shady. She had brought it into my life. If she had accomplices or a bigger game at play, I needed to know. Not just for closure, but for survival. That night, I started digging. Jessica's phone was still in evidence, but I'd already copied her recent contacts and messages onto my personal drive. I sifted through them, looking for patterns, anything that could clue me in on what she'd been up to. One name kept popping up, James Harper. He wasn't in her saved contacts, but his number showed up again and again in her call logs and messages, always around the same time she'd been meeting with Ethan. I ran the name through our database, but it came up clean, too clean. If James Harper was real, he wasn't using his real name. I tried calling the number. It rang 3 times before going to voicemail. The automated message was useless. Frustrated, I hung up and stared at the screen. If Harper was involved with Jessica, he might be the key to everything.